everybody, Josh Sigurdson of World Alternative Media here, and we are joined today by our returning guest, Richard Gage, AIA, San Francisco Bay architect, member of the American Institute of Architects, and founder of Architects and Engineers for 9/11 Truth. We are also joined on the line by Barbara Honegger of Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry. She, of course, wrote The October Surprise, which is historic, led to a massive investigation regarding Iran Contra. She worked in the Reagan-Bush White House, rather. And of course, she is the co-author of a petition filed with the U.S. Attorney in Manhattan this past April. And we appreciate both of you joining us. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Josh.
Thanks, Josh. Great to be here.
Yeah.
Now, this is really big news. There are finally steps being taken following your petition, Barbara. Can you explain the latest news over the past week, what the petition demands, and the recent response to this petition?
Yes, allow me to, and I will definitely answer that very important question. Allow me to just say up front, of course, it's not my petition. It's the petition of the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry. And I need to say up front that we have a rule in the Lawyers Committee, I'm on the board of the Lawyers Committee, that to make any official statement on behalf of the Lawyers Committee per se, there need to be two of the attorneys from the board on the radio or television program. So I'm speaking as a private citizen, but of course I'm knowledgeable because I am on the board. So with that upfront statement, let me answer your question. Okay, so the bottom line is, people, we have had an historic breakthrough for 9/11 Truth and Justice on November 7th. So it was a little bit ago now, and I can explain, if you're interested, why it took a while to get the information out to the public, which we did in the last few days. But about 3 days ago, the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry announced in official press releases, and I will send that to you, by the way, for a link on your website if there is one to go with the audio and visual of this show. The Lawyers Committee announced that on November 7th, the Lawyers Committee received an official letter, which I will send you also for your website, an official letter from the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York. That's the federal courthouse in Manhattan that has the jurisdiction for the World Trade Center events on 9/11. And we received a letter saying, to our shock and pleasant surprise, that the U.S. Attorney would be doing as we demanded, which is to follow the law. And he cited the federal statute that they're going to follow, and that federal statute explicitly in its text requires them, and they said they would do it, to submit our grand jury petition, which is online on the Lawyers Committee website for the world to read, www.lc911.org, that they will be submitting our petition and the 57 evidentiary exhibits proving that the official story of what brought down World Trade Centers 1, 2, and 7 on 9/11, the latter not hit by any plane whatsoever and came down in a classic controlled demolition, will be submitted to a specially convened special criminal grand jury. This is historic.
Wow, this is the biggest news I've heard in quite some time regarding 9/11, and we'll go to Richard right away as well, but because I want to hear his comments on this news. But Barbara, do you believe there's a clear path forward in exposing the crimes that occurred on 9/11?
Well, yes. I mean, the petition is the beginning, of course, of that clear path forward. People need to understand that this is an official action. We have moved from 9/11 forensic evidence and facts to 9/11 justice. And one of the most exciting pieces of news is that I drafted, on behalf of the Lawyers Committee, I'm kind of their, publicity person as well as their research person. But the other day, 2 days ago, I drafted a press release, 400-word press release that was put out 2 days ago in the morning, 8:30 a.m. East Coast time by PR Newswire. And it went to all of the entire US One market, which means as many as 8.5 million readers and viewers. And it has already been picked up by 165. I can send you the list. You can put it on your website. I'm going to send it to Richard and A&E as well, architects and engineers as well. It's already been picked up by over 165 mainstream newspapers like the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette and mainstream radio and mainstream television, and they have reposted it on their websites verbatim, including the embedded links to our petition, to our evidentiary exhibits, and to the U.S. Attorney's letter. This is official action, and they are covering it in the mainstream media.
Yeah, and I think it's amazing to finally see something like this coming forward of this magnitude. It gives me a lot more hope than the 28 pages catastrophe. But Richard, what are your thoughts on this recent news, and how important has the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry been to supporting what AI 911 has been working so hard on exposing for so many years?
Yeah, the Lawyers Committee has been doing exceptional work. They've been with us step by step, and now they're launching forward. Maybe we were carrying the burden, from back in from 2006 and 7, and then the Lawyers Committee got formed in the last several years. Of course, our petition calls for a real, unimpeachable 9/11 investigation, specifically at regarding the destruction of the 3 World Trade Center skyscrapers. So this is music to our ears, almost unbelievable. It's a little hard to fathom it. But we're crossing our fingers, and we're backing the Lawyers Committee 100%. And of course, the evidence that we've compiled over the last 12 years is getting packaged and is going to be ready to go to help this poor grand jury panel, which is going to be besieged from left and right, I'm sure.
Well, and the evidence that piles up so high, it's almost incontrovertible at this point. I mean, most people you talk to on the streets that maybe might not have an involvement in 9/11 truth per se, but they don't feel good about the official story. I think the vast majority of people I've spoken to feel that way, and I've told you about that before, Richard. And now this is a question for both of you, starting with Richard and then going to Barbara. It's an honest question, and I mean it with complete sincerity. I understand that this is certainly a major step forward, but I must ask, if the government was behind the events of 9/11 as a false flag operation, and the government opened a new investigation into 9/11, wouldn't government investigating itself be kind of like a suspected murderer investigating him or herself and being likely to find no wrongdoing in its own case? Richard?
Well, we don't know what's going on behind the scenes at the U.S. Attorney's Office in Southern Manhattan District. We don't know who is the grand jury, the members of them. There are significant examples, and Barbara can cite these, of grand juries who have done right despite the efforts to constrict their scope of review. What we know is we're going to be presenting them, and Barbara can address this too, hopefully directly, packages of evidence that are absolutely irrefutable for the explosive demolition of all 3 of these World Trade Center skyscrapers.
And Barbara, you've been considered kind of a white cap, I guess you could say, going back to the 1980s, basically someone who was in government and had the bravery to expose things that were happening within the government. And I wanted to ask, with context to my previous question, do you think there's hope for people within the government coming out about what we saw on 9/11 and exposing the truths that are being hidden, obviously, in plain sight?
Well, you've just thrown 2 really big questions at me. Let me try the first one first that Richard just answered. I think people need to know that the evidence is incontrovertible, and that evidence is explicitly detailed and referenced with the evidentiary exhibits themselves. And we're talking about formal studies results. We're talking about academic peer-reviewed papers. We're talking about videos of the eyewitnesses. These are all amongst the 57 pieces of evidentiary information that are part of the petition. They are an official part of our grand jury petition that is going to be, they said so in the letter, they are going to be following the law. The law is very clear that all of the information that we have provided, they said in the letter they reviewed it. Mm-hmm. Let's realize the letter was signed by the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, and that was a typed signature, and under that it was actually signed, like a signature, by the Assistant U.S. Attorney for Counterterrorism and Terrorism. They have read every word of this. We have educated the U.S. Attorney and the top Assistant U.S. Attorney in Manhattan on the truth. They have just been enlightened. They're human beings. That's their town. That's their city. And they are going to be giving it to between, I think it's 18 and 23 concerned citizens, almost certainly in that city. They care about their city, and they're going to care about the truth, and they will be given it, and they will read it. It's the evidence that turns people around. That what we've been fighting against all these years is people who refuse to look at the evidence, mostly. Okay, and can you remind me of your second question?
Well, yeah, do you think there's a lot of hope of people within the government doing like you did with Iran Contra, coming out of the shadows and exposing what they may or may not know that's been hidden from us for so long?
Well, that's already happened. Look at Civil Edmonds. You know, look at Civil Edmonds. We have the grand jury petitions, evidentiary exhibits, and that's just the tip of the iceberg. But we chose, of course, the ones that we thought were the best to include, that hit you between the eyes like a 2x4. You can't question them. That in amongst the 57 evidentiary exhibits, which are part of the petition, there are statements and evidence from whistleblowers, unbelievable whistleblowers, from over 100 first responders, firemen, in their official statements to the fire department in New York City. There's no question once you look. And these 18 to 23 ordinary, probably New York citizens are going to see the truth. And when they see the truth, yes, I think there's more than hope. And do I think people will come out? Yes, now that it's known and it's being put out by the mainstream media, and it's growing every day, by the way, in response to our PR Newswire release just 2 days ago. This is now official news. We have a link in our press release to the actual U.S. Attorney's letter. You got to put that up on your website. It says it all.
Absolutely. It's truly incredible. And we have to look back at how for years there's a lot of gray area surrounding, for example, the Kennedy assassination. And then all these whistleblowers came out, and all the people that would be held to justice are unfortunately no longer with us. How much of a difference does this petition and this inquiry make to potentially bringing people to justice before, decades go by, or decades more go by rather, and people are just never held accountable for their own actions?
Well, with the Kennedy assassination, we had the Zapruder film, which didn't come out for years. Mm-hmm. With 9/11, we've got, how many, Richard? I think that, 82 videos of the World Trade Center collapses? I mean, you'll have to tell me.
Well, yeah, and we have the peer-reviewed paper from the team of 8 international scientists led by Niels Harrit in Copenhagen, which is 25 pages of irrefutable evidence that there's nanothermite chips found in all the World Trade Center samples. It should not be there. This has to be acknowledged. It's been denied and kind of wished away by a lot of people for a long time, but here it is in the hands of jurors, and as Barbara mentioned, 165 mainstream media outlets. So something's going to happen here. People are going to be looking at this petition. They're going to be seeing this evidence, which includes the U.S. Geological Survey finding billions and billions of previously molten iron microspheres in all the World Trade Center dust samples, amounting to 10 tons of what can only be the residue of ignited thermite. which should not be there either. They have no
Talk
other.
about a smoking gun. That's a thermite. It's the smoking gun.
Yeah, and people are going to be educated about the third tower, which we also call the smoking gun, World Trade Center Building 7, a 47-story skyscraper that on the afternoon of 9/11, after multiple witnesses hear explosions, drops like a rock straight down, uniformly, symmetrically into its own footprint in under 7 seconds. Just like a controlled demolition.
Well, Richard, I have to mention something because you just reminded me. Recently, I saw a Fox News host claim that the claims about Building 7 were nonsense. I went to school for architecture and engineering. All the CAD work that I went through. Of course, you're an architect. I wanted to hear your thoughts on this claim that by this Fox News host that Building 7 fell because it was on a landfill and all the buildings were on shaky grounds at the time. I mean, it was such an absurd point. I have to hear your thoughts on that.
It is absurd, and it's the first time I've ever heard that point. These buildings were built on bedrock. Their foundations go all the way down, in the case of the Twin Towers, 7 stories through a basement to solid ground. And even NIST, the agency that was tasked by Congress to determine how and why these 3 buildings collapsed, NIST is the National Institute of Standards and Technology, they even say that the buildings were robust, that there was no problem with the shaking of their foundations, and there's no problem with the shaking of the foundation of Building 7 when the Twin Towers came down either. So we can refute Fox News just by the official story itself from NIST.
Right, and also it's extremely important, and the grand jury is going to learn this very quickly as well, that the towers were actually designed and constructed by the architects and built to specifically and explicitly withstand the impact of the kinds of planes that hit them on 9/11.
Yeah.
Well, the biggest planes at the time they had, which was 707s, but they traveled faster, so they had the same kinetic energy. In fact, John Skilling, who's the mentor of Leslie Robertson, said it could stand the 2 planes hitting it. But the problem would be that the fuel would dump into the building, but the building would still be there. It's designed to withstand even jet fuel fire.
Yeah, they thought about that.
Even Donald Trump himself has mentioned that the structural stability of the World Trade Center back in the 90s, at least, he said it was incredible. It was incredibly sturdy. It was able to withstand a massive bombing in the 1990s. I mean, these were well-built buildings, and to those that think that a building that is as big as a World Trade Center would just fall into its footprint practically at near free-fall speeds, it just makes absolutely no sense. You'd have to just throw away any trust you have in any architect or engineer for the rest of your life and just assume that any building can just at a little minor earthquake fall into the ground like nothing. It is so absolutely absurd. Barbara, since we haven't had the opportunity to talk with you in the past, can you tell our audience how you came to get involved in the 9/11 Truth Movement?
Oh, well, that's a good question too. Believe it or not, at the time before 9/11, beginning in 1995, and for another 11 years after 9/11, so for over a decade and a half, I was the senior military affairs journalist at the Naval Postgraduate School here in the Monterey Peninsula of California, Central California coast, where I live. And the Naval Postgraduate School, also known as NPS, where I was the senior military journalist for all that time, is billed by DoD itself, by the Department of Defense, as the Pentagon's premier science, technology, and national security affairs graduate research university. So I was the senior military affairs journalist there for over a decade and a half, for 16 years. And it was in that capacity on the morning of 9/11 that I was not allowed in the gate. This is a military base, even though it's a military university. I was not allowed into the gate. And because I was not considered like just the very top people, the admiral and a few under him, as so-called essential personnel. And so I got to go home and watch television. And just like the event that triggered my research that resulted in my book October Surprise, on the true story behind the Iran side of Iran Contra, which came out a long time ago in 1989 in May. The research for that book was triggered by a single event, which was then President Reagan and Vice President George Bush putting their hands up to take the oath of office on January 20th, 1981. And the hostages in Iran, the 52 hostages, being released instantly thereafter. I knew I smelled a huge rat, and it didn't take too long for me to pull together a 76-page detailed reference timeline that formed the basis of my book October Surprise. The same kind of thing happened on 9/11. I drove the few miles to my mother's home in Carmel, turned on the television, walked in. My brother happened to be there, and I said, we're at war. And they said, what? And I said, turn on the television. And they didn't even have it on. They were talking about carpet samples. And they turned on the television, and we watched the first tower, the South Tower, fall. And of course, there were repeats of what had happened just before that, both of the plane impacts, and they played those ad nauseum on the television. I believe I was watching ABC that morning. And instantly, just like with the taking of the oath of office and the hostages were released, I smelled a rat. And from day one, in my official position, talk about somebody from in the government who's talking, that first person inside the government was me. And I never stopped. I've never stopped. And the miracle is they let me stay in my official position as that senior military affairs journalist for that top DoD university in the entire country for 11 years until I retired in June of 1911. And through those entire years, as Richard knows well, I was in the public space and in the government space. Even though I held that job, and they didn't touch me.
You said June of 1911, Barb.
I meant
time traveler.
I meant 2011. I'm not that old, folks. Not quite.
Of course. Well, just going forward, Barbara, how long do you think the time frame will be going forward for this inquiry to really get to the next level and perhaps expose people behind the curtains that might be involved in this?
Well, we don't know. But grand juries, as I recall, now I should say that the law requires the U.S. Attorney in the Southern District of New York to convene a special criminal grand jury for this specific purpose, not just take an existing sitting, already convened criminal grand jury. So that's a process that takes time. You have to go through the voting rolls or the DMV record rolls, and you have to bring in many, many more potential jurors, and you have to vet those jurors. It's a long process. It's supposed to be randomly selected. So that takes time. And then, as I understand it, criminal grand juries especially are usually convened for a pre-specified period of time. It can be a year, it can be 18 months. Mm-hmm. And now people need to understand that grand juries are secret. They do not have to tell us anything about what's happening, besides letting us know that they're going to do it, which they did in the U.S. Attorney's letter that we received on it was dated November 7th. We actually didn't receive it for quite a while after that, and there's a story behind that, but it's unimportant. And when we finally did receive it, and it was opened, by the way, some coffee spilled on the letter, which we had to clean up electronically to put it on the web. But it takes time. I would say probably a year and a half. But the good news is that I can't tell you what they are, but our attorneys on the Lawyers Committee board are very, very smart, and they have been fighting the government whistleblower attorneys for a very long time, and we have backup plans, believe me.
Well, I'm looking forward to all of this. This is very exciting. I've been following 9/11 since I was a kid, and actually, interestingly enough, Barbara, when I was a kid, I remember my mom, who's totally not political at all, telling me about exactly what you exposed regarding Iran, and I remember sitting with
your own mother.
Yeah, I remember hearing about that in the early 2000s, and it always stuck in my head. So it's very interesting to finally speak with you. And Richard, hitting it home for those who still think the official story regarding 9/11 is correct. Why should people question the events of that faithful day?
Well, we have a whole lot of evidence. Barb mentioned 57 separate points of evidence. Starting with Building 7, we have the irrefutable evidence of the controlled demolition of that building, the fact that it came down symmetrically, the fact that it came down at free fall, the fact that it came down in under 7 seconds, all indicates that all 82 columns had to have been removed simultaneously. Guess what? The official cause of that building's failure is normal office fires. Well, normal office fires have never brought down a skyscraper before 9/11. And so all of a sudden, it does exactly what a controlled demolition does. In addition, there's evidence in the dust, as we've already discussed, the molten iron microspheres, the diameter of a human hair, billions of them, 10 tons of them, unexplained in the official story. The presence of nanothermite chips, again, up to 10 tons of these materials by extrapolation are found and documented in a peer-reviewed paper. As Barbara mentioned, we have the hundreds, actually now, of witnesses of explosions occurring before there was any descent of the top portion of either of the Twin Towers. We have the laterally freely flying structural steel sections weighing 4 tons, laterally ejected 60 miles an hour, some of them 80 miles an hour, landing up to 600 feet in every direction. That's the energy of a 200-pound cannonball shot 3 miles. And there's thousands of these, such that there's no pile at the bottom of either tower. So we have the lack of concrete floors as well, 110 of them, each an acre in size in each of the Twin Towers. But there's no stack of them found at the bottom of either pile, just a 3-4 story pile. Where's the concrete? It's pulverized in midair and spread in a 4-inch thick blanket over lower Manhattan, 3 square miles. So this kind of evidence goes on and on and on. And I would refer people to the YouTube video which we've put up called 9/11 Explosive Evidence, Experts Speak Out. Just search Experts Speak Out on YouTube. You'll see all this evidence from 40 high-rise architects, structural engineers, metallurgists, chemists, physicists, controlled demolition experts. It's all there for everybody to see.
Yeah, absolutely.
If I may add to that on just one point of evidence, the one that really grabs me in addition to everything that Richard just said, and especially World Trade Center 7, which architects and engineers in our movement calls the smoking gun, there is another smoking gun, and it is featured in the grand jury petition and the evidentiary exhibits, including videos of the whistleblowers who experienced it themselves, and there are at least 24 of them. And that is the fact that very few people know that that we have official seismic evidence and we have expert analysis showing that of the analysis of that official seismic evidence of the seismic record of what happened at both World Trade Center towers in New York on 9/11, that there was a massive explosion in the deep basement of the first tower, World Trade Center 1, 14 seconds before the plane hit, not after. And for World Trade Center 2, there was a massive deep basement explosion in the deep basement of World Trade Center 2, 17 seconds before the plane hit that tower.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've heard firefighters actually speaking of that explosion. We got the firefighters, first responders, pilots, architects and engineers, lawyers. There are so many people that have embraced this evidence and are trying to expose what happened, because we have to remember not just thousands of people died on 9/11, but it was used as a way to bring the United States into war, and it landed with millions of people dead.
And those wars are still going on. The 9/11 wars are still going on, and they're trying to take it to Iran.
They're trying to take it to Iran, and they've been trying to destroy Iran for a long time as well, as you've exposed. There is so much evidence, and you know you have a good argument when it would take you hundreds of hours to break down all of the evidence involving this one fateful day. This is incredibly important, folks. I know some people will say, oh, that's old news. Is it? Because it continues to this day. We are still experiencing
the legal rubber has just met the road.
Absolutely. So very, very excited about where this goes next. We appreciate you both joining us today and hope to have you back again as the story moves forward. Starting with Barbara and then to Richard, how can people support the work you're doing and find more information?
Well, thank you for asking. So I would direct everyone, of course, to the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry webpage, where you will read our grand jury petition that is now going to be presented to a specially convened special criminal grand jury in Manhattan, close to Ground Zero, in the near future. And our petition is there. There's a separate button to read the actual 57 evidentiary exhibits that the grand jurors in Manhattan are going to be reading. And also there's a button to click on, or I think you just scroll down, to see the U.S. Attorney's letter itself, and of course our press release that is now being picked up by mainstream press, newspapers, and television stations across the United States and the world. Around the world, by the way, not just the United States, according to our pickup report that I got yesterday morning. And that website is www.lcfor911.org. So that's lc4911.org.
And it's very important, Josh, for people to understand that there's a huge amount of work left to be done here by the lawyers for this to repackage and amplify and expand the work that's already been done by them for the grand jury panel. So there's a very much a need to support the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Inquiry with your funds at this time. And for those of you who support AE 9/11 Truth, we are also supporting the Lawyers Committee for 9/11 Truth. So if you send a donation to ae911truth.org, be sure to mark it for the grand jury petition.
And the same thing on our website. There's a place, I think it's obvious on the main page, where to donate. And we're about to start a major fundraising drive using the excitement of the U.S. Attorney's letter in the very near future.
This is exciting, folks. We need to continuously push our efforts forward. We've been talking about this we're coming up on 2 decades. Now isn't the time to stand down. There are people that need to face justice. There are people that need, this whole, military-industrial complex, destruction of the global, stability is incredibly important, and it's killing millions of people. It's affecting millions. It's causing crises, refugee crises. It's causing a vast poverty. It's causing so much destruction. We cannot back down now. There's so much more to be done. Continuously, look at what architects and engineers for 9/11 Truth and the lawyers are doing as well. There's so much more to be done. Check out their websites. I really appreciate you joining us today. It is really a beautiful thing to see that there are still some people out there that care enough about a truth to put their life and put all of their energy behind exposing that truth. So thank you both for joining us.
We're never going to stop.
Like what you see here, OM? Don't forget to check the links below. GoFundMe, Patreon. We can't do it without you. Any donation is very much appreciated, especially as we are so vastly demonetized and censored on YouTube, as these guys come in and flag all of our content as hate speech. Also, check out our Bitcoin address below as well as on the screen for you to scan if you please. And also check us out at steemit.com. We're at Josh Sigurdson. It's a future of social media where you get paid in the upvote of your post in cryptocurrency, Steem that is. So make sure to check us out there. Make sure to join us at Anarchapulco 2019 with people like Ron Paul, G. Edward Griffin, of course, Jeff Berwick, Vid Jedlicka. So many incredible speakers are going to be speaking. It's just a massively growing event. It is something you have to see to believe. So make sure to check it out below and save money on your tickets discounts by using promo code WHAM, that's WAM, and I hope to see you there. Also, check out our newsletter as we are getting demonetized and censored and all that. We don't know what comes next, so we have an email, worldalternativemedia@gmail.com. Send us an email with subject line YES, YES, and we will include you in the newsletter where we will continuously keep you updated. So until next time, thanks for watching, everyone. This is Josh Sigurdson signing out from World Alternative Media. Find the truth, be the change.
I'm sure you have already changed people's minds in your young age because you're involved, and I like that.
Thank you.